Local Edge, powered by Ad Canada Media.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome to our latest Season 2 episode of Local Edge, your show for better understanding and connecting with small communities in Canada. Here, we explore the value of these markets to advertisers, agencies, communities, so much more. We bring you the latest news, insights, and the trends from the world of local advertising and marketing. I'm your host, Shauna Randolph. And in this episode, we're going to explore how local news media ensures brand safety for advertisers, unlike the often unpredictable social media environment. It's a chat between the CEO of Ad Canada Media, Jeff Beardsworth, and Grant Ainsley, a former Alberta journalist specializing these days in media relations. So, whether you're an advertiser, agency, community member, or just somebody interested in the world of local advertising, just sit back, relax, and enjoy our show.
Western Canadians love dining out. In Western Canada, rural households collectively spend over $3.26 billion annually on restaurant meals, while urban households spend an impressive $9.12 billion each year. On a per capita basis, that's approximately $3,321 annually for rural households and $3,193 for urban households. Yes, each community has its own preferred tastes. Want insights into which communities to prioritize for various promotions? Ad Canada Media offers the tools and expertise to help you target both rural and urban diners. Whether you're promoting a local eatery or a national restaurant chain, our insights can help you connect with the right audience. Visit adcanadamedia.ca to serve up your advertising message.
Today, we're going to be discussing the important topic of trust and credibility in journalism, especially focusing on our local media outlets. Unlike major conglomerates, local newspapers have a unique relationship with their communities. My name is Jeff Beardsworth. I'm the CEO and Advertising Director of Ad Canada Media, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by my friend Grant Ainsley, a former journalist and media trainer based here in Edmonton. Grant, welcome to the Local Edge.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks. Nice to be here. Nice to be here talking media, journalism, all the things that I love and we both love.
For sure. Grant, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I started in the media, radio in Edmonton many years ago. Left the media. I was in Edmonton and radio for about 15 years. Left the media in the early 90s. Did a few other things, and for about the last 16 years, I've been going across the country as a media trainer. So I work with a lot of municipalities, I work with some corporate sector, associations, NGOs, basically showing their people how to speak to the news media.
Excellent. And Grant, let's start off by talking a little bit about how surveys and research that has come out over the last few years has kind of shown that people have a growing distrust of the media.
Yeah.
You know, what do you see in there? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, the numbers are all over the place. Like I see 25% all the way up to 46% of people said they don't trust the media. They don't trust what they see on television or don't trust what there is in the news. And I think with the numbers that high, you kind of wonder, well, why do you even, if you don't trust it, if that many people don't trust it, why do you watch it anyways? Or why do you consume it? And I'm not disputing the figures of whatever that percentage is of people saying today in Canada that they mistrust they don't trust what's in the media. But I'd like to see how that is broken down. I'd also like to see what they're talking about. I don't think these people are talking about, their local newspaper, be it a daily or a weekly newspaper, covering their town council or their city council or developments in their community. I don't think they're talking about their local newscast on television, covering events in their city. And I don't think they're talking about local content, maybe on the radio as they drive to work in the morning. I don't think that's where the mistrust is. I still think there's a lot of believability and trust in local journalism. I think they're talking about other things.
Yeah, and Ad Canada, Grant, is an organization. We're a media company too, and we've done studies ourselves, to kind of get a sense for whether or not trust is more pertinent to certain sizes of newspapers or in certain markets. Do you think, and you've already mentioned, you think that this is something that is specific or local media might be excluded from this issue of trust. Do you see it being an issue, though, that might be specific to a certain platform or maybe a certain market size or community type? Like,
Yeah, I think we're talking more about television. We're talking about national television. With the one exclusion, I think Postmedia nationally, newspapers would be included in this mistrust in some ways. Their president and CEO has said that they're there to be a right-wing voice, and so typically newspapers like the Edmonton Journal and the Calgary Herald have this conglomeration of this national sort of focus, and then some of the local stuff. But really, Jeff, what I think we're talking about is CBC, and in the States we're talking about CNN and Fox News, and I think, you know, you have to go back to when, you know, these news organizations started. It's a, you know, bit of a history, but, you know, they started out, and I think they found pretty quickly on CNN when they started back in 1980, I think it was, that there's not enough news to cover 24 hours. And so the easiest way and the cheapest way is to bring people in to talk about the news. And these are the experts. And so these people are giving their opinions of the news. And so that went along for a number of years, and people started to, oh, I really don't know if that's what I agree with. And this mistrust started to build. And then we got into the decision that some of these stations were making, because now there's more players on the box, Fox News and so on and so forth. They all had to go for their share of the market. So CNN is central to the left, and Fox News is, you know, right center, and you got ones that are even more right center than that. And so people look at this and they go, yeah, I don't agree with what they're saying, or you know, because somebody's giving their opinion, and they're going, I don't agree with this. I can't trust what they're saying. And I think we saw that a lot, you know, recently during the Democratic Convention, where you watch CNN and you watch Fox News, and I watch both of them, and it's like a completely different convention. And you're going, so it's really easy to understand why some people are going, I can't trust the news because of what they see there. Again, I don't believe they're talking about local journalism.
so you've mentioned that local newspapers, local radio stations, and perhaps other local news outlets might be immune from this distrust issue. Why do you think that is? Well, what would make somebody more trusting of news appearing in their local newspaper as opposed to what they might see on CNN? How does that happen?
I don't think they're immune, because I think to a certain degree they're all tarred with the same brush, you know, and it's all media in some people's minds. And I think if you look hard enough, you could find where, I don't think that's right. But I think the thing to think about here is that local journalism is really the same as it was 50 years ago. It certainly is pretty close to the same when I left the business around 30 years ago. It is a local reporter covering a town council, city council meeting, you know, a car crash, whatever it is. And they're trying to get to the bottom of the story. They're trying to find stories that interest their readers. They're not trying to go out and create, you know, some right wing or left wing sort of content. I think they're trying to cover the news like they have for a number of years. To me, there's not a decision by their media outlet to go one direction or the other, like we see in, you know, television. Even in CBC, we certainly can see that there is room where people, if they think they're all supporting Liberals and Pierre Trudeau, there's probably some reality to that. But with local journalism, again, I don't think they're doing the same thing. I think they're trying to do the best job they can with their very limited resources.
You know, Grant, let's address the elephant in the room. Obviously, in the last decade or so, social media has inserted itself into the news business, almost to the point of it being conflated as news outlets. You know, I think we've all heard the term fake news, you know, and we kind of know where that came from. Yeah. But social media has kind of been able to exacerbate it and blow this issue up. Do you think that social media is perhaps partly to blame for where we sit now in terms of this distrust in the media? And
yeah, no question. No question. You don't know when you look at Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. I have a hard time calling it X. Of where that comment is. It looks like a pretty solid journalist, and there's a bunch of right-wing views, and so you start to wonder, what am I getting here? And you just don't know. It's, you know, it's like lifting up a rock and seeing what's under there. That's what's happening. So yes, I absolutely 100%. I think there's now. They have run legitimate news stories, less of them because of the court case that's going on, where some of the social media outlets have decided they're not going to run news stories because they don't want to pay for them. But Yes, absolutely. It's adding to the mistrust. And it's also interesting, Jeff, I've seen a number of comments lately on X where people are saying, gee, why isn't the media covering this story? Why isn't the media covering this story about Pierre Poilievre? Why aren't they onto this story about that makes Justin Trudeau look bad? And it's almost like they want to weaponize the media. They know that this, and well, hey, maybe it's a story, maybe it isn't, but I think the reality is it's really hard to sort of follow up on some of that investigative work because you just don't have the staff anymore to do it. Sure, it'd be great if they could take a reporter or 2 reporters, 3 reporters and spend 3 weeks digging into this alleged story. Do they have time or the bodies to do it?
I want to dig into this a little bit more, Grant, in the sense that, we've talked a little bit about social media and how it's perhaps a little bit more prone to this issue of trust and lack of credibility. I want to tie advertising into this.
Okay.
Do you see a danger for advertisers who are investing, budgets, big numbers, in fact, in advertising on platforms that perhaps don't have the same level of trust as say a local radio station or a local newspaper? Are there challenges there, or are there landmines for advertisers using social media as a big part of their ad strategies?
Absolutely. So a couple of things. First of all, on advertising that I think it's important to mention. Number one is, yes, who do you call when your ad on X is right next to the ad for OnlyFans? You don't call your local rep and saying, hey, what the heck happened? For many years, you didn't want to have 2 car companies having commercials back to back, 2 car dealerships. Who do you call if you get into situations like that? So absolutely, you enter this cesspool where you really don't know what you're going to be up against, what you're going to be next to, who your competition's going to be. But I think the bigger issue, Jeff, and you know this far too well, the biggest problem that we have with traditional media today is that a lot of the advertising dollars have left and they've gone to digital media. And so what has happened is that, when all the dollars used to come into newspapers and radio stations and TV stations, a growing percentage of those dollars have now gone to digital media. And we're well past the stage where newspapers have to do more with less. And so we see the product that is there right now. And people say, yeah, Grant, well, if, not as many people are reading newspapers anymore, or not as many people are watching the news for local news for television. That's true, but those are symptoms. The real root cause is that the advertising dollars have left the door. They walked out the door. They're probably not coming back. There's a growing percentage of dollars spent on digital media every year, unfortunately. Those dollars are not staying in the community where the newspaper is or the radio station is or whatever it might be. They're not staying in Western Canada. They're all going to California, to Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and you name it. And so what are we left with? We're left with what seems to be a dying industry. And that's a problem for communities. That's a problem for the traditional media outlets. And I think it's a problem for communities too, where people really want to know what goes on in their community. That is number one.
100%. So with all of that being said, Grant, what can a local newspaper or a local radio station do to leverage or take advantage of this trust deficit that exists between, their local newspaper and social media? Are there things newspapers can do to actually benefit from this trust issue?
That's hard because it's a chicken and egg thing, because yes, they can benefit because they're the only game in town when it comes to local news. Nobody's going to be covering something going on in Lacombe or Estevan, or unless that's a huge story. The big TV stations from Regina aren't going to come out, or Edmonton's not going to be covering Lacombe or whatever. And so that's to their advantage. But the problem is they face the same issue that the bigger stations face. They don't have the dollars anymore because of advertising. So it's a chicken and egg thing. Yes, their advantage is that they're local and they can get stories in the paper that nobody else is going to get. But their problem is, can they get enough money to get the bodies to get them? That's the problem.
No doubt that's a challenge. I guess from my experience working in the newspapers industry, one of the things that newspapers and radio stations, and in fact any local media, the strengths are their faces in the community. They're not just a name on a masthead. It's Joe Smith, the reporter for the Kamsack Times, and Joe Smith he's at the Lions meetings, he's at the pancake breakfast, the local newspaper sponsoring the sports teams. They're making donations to the various causes, And when I get a publisher calling me and saying, Jeff, what can we do? How can we prove that we're a trustworthy organization? How do we build that rapport with our audience? The answer that I give them is always the same. You've got to be out in the community. The Facebooks and the Amazons and the Googles, you never see their logo across the chest of the local hockey team's hockey jerseys, right? That to me is how local newspapers or radio stations can kind of maintain not only the trust, but the relationship with the audience, with the readers.
100%. And I think, we heard this term corporate social responsibility going back 10, 15, 20 years ago. Don't hear as much about it now. But it basically means that our company's going to be good corporate stewards. And, what's their environmental record? Do they have a higher local policy? Things like that. And I'm starting to wonder if companies should also think about their advertising and investments in communities. It doesn't mean a lot to Facebook or Google if somebody spends $50,000 on an ad campaign. It means quite a bit to the Kamsack Times. And I think these companies have to start to think a little bit more about what might be left behind in the community if the local paper doesn't survive. Who's going to cover the event that they are sponsoring? Facebook's not going to cover it. Instagram's not going to cover it. Who's going to cover the event that they're sponsoring in that community? And so I think they need to step back and, hey, they have to make advertising decisions on what works for them. But at the same time, I think it's also important for them to think about what is going to happen in the community if that newspaper isn't there anymore, or that small radio station isn't there anymore. Because if the trend continues the way it has, and I hate to think about this day, but if the trend continues the way it is, in the next 10 to 20 years, we will not have printed newspapers anymore across Canada, maybe with the exception of like a Globe and Mail or Toronto Star. And I don't think we'll have local news. I mean, we're seeing already where CTV has cut all their local newscasts on weekends across Canada, other than a couple of markets, Toronto and I think Ottawa. And we're starting to see now Global start to follow along. And okay, can we do the Edmonton news on the weekend out of Calgary or vice versa? What's next? Do we, 10, 15 years from now, do they say we just can't afford to have reporters and have a newscast locally anymore? I shudder to think of that day. How are we going to find out what's going on in our community?
Grant, I want to call a little bit upon your experience in having worked with the media. And you'd mentioned earlier, some of the challenges with the unpredictability of social media or ads placed through the Google network, ad appearing on an OnlyFans site or whatever the case might be, which might not align to, the company's objectives that's doing the advertising. In your experience, do you come across strategies that media use to ensure, and when I say strategies that media use, I'm talking about traditional media, local radio station or local newspaper. Do they do things to ensure that very thing that a client might be concerned about with the social media campaign doesn't happen in the newspaper, the Edmonton Journal? What things do you see local media doing to ensure that the placement of the ad is going to be in line with the company's ideals?
There's some local control. There's somebody there that does the layout, that, you got eyes on it. And unfortunately, we're seeing, none of that being done through social. It's wherever you end up. It's the luck of the draw. We're also seeing that even with some of the layout for Postmedia newspapers, where they cobble together this sort of combination of a national product and then we got to add some local stories and a couple of local sports stories and a local entertainment story, and they cobble things together. Sometimes you find the same story twice in the same newspaper. So yes, but I think on a local level, the different thing is that you've got somebody you can call when you got an issue. Who do you call when you got an issue? I mean, Elon Musk isn't taking your call for your advertising problem on X.
No, it's true. I know in my experience in working with the newspapers, and this is one of those things that happens behind the scenes that, we don't talk about. We don't promote this. We don't market it. Maybe we should start doing this a little bit more. But I know many, if not most or all newspapers these days, when they're putting the newspaper together, great care is being made to ensure that every single ad is appearing in a place in the paper that either has some kind of relevance content-wise, or at the very least, it's ensuring that, or the papers are ensuring that it's not appearing right next to a competitor or some kind of a controversial topic.
Yeah.
And you've made this point now several times. When that does happen, there is somebody to call. And I know that does happen. So I agree with you that that's something that local media can offer that a lot of the online companies, particularly the social media companies, don't really maybe care about. I can't be misspeaking.
Yeah, no. It's not. It's dollars in. That's what they're trying to do, and they do it very well. There's obviously a huge market. You can do a lot of things with your social media ads, likes, clicks, shares. All those things can be counted, monitored. You can see the numbers right there. I buy Google ads myself because they work for me, but I think corporations have to take a long look at where they do business and where they make their money, and whether that advertising outlet is going to be there for the future, and what happens when it isn't.
Can you see any potential long-term benefits to an advertiser or brand to invest portion of their budget in local media where their message is going to be, say, in a safer environment? Can you see an advertiser benefiting over the long term from creating a relationship with a media outlet that has trust within its audience and within its community?
I think so. Newspapers, I believe, I'd like the line, the newspaper of record, because what it means is we can look back 50 years, 70 years, whatever it is, and find a story in a newspaper that was about a certain topic. I don't know, in the old days, you and I went to the library and looked at microfiche or whatever it was. It's probably all online at someplace now. And that's important to communities still, that you can have that newspaper of record that is solid, that is there. You're not going to find that story on radio, or you're not going to find it maybe on television, but there's a way to sort of research and find all those stories. And I think when you're part of that community, there's a responsibility. And I think people look for those things. And I think there's also a real value to that as well. My advice is stay local, pump the local stuff. That's your advantage. Keep going after it. I know the challenges because it's hard to pay those journalists when you don't have dollars coming in.
100%. One of the things that I've kind of seen, Grant, in my 30 years in the newspaper business is, and I've become convinced of this, the local newspaper, and the smaller the community, I think the more this is actually applicable. But the newspapers seem to be part of the family, part of the fabric of these communities. And if you're an advertiser in that newspaper, you are kind of embraced or brought in as part of the family.
Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, that's one of the ways that an advertiser or a brand can leverage the relationship that the newspaper, the radio station has with its, not only its audience, but more so its community. You are seen to be supporting not only the newspaper, but you're seen to be supporting the people who live in the community. You are helping to bring them their newspaper every week. And I think, in these smaller markets, that's hugely appreciated.
Yeah.
And
I think it's something that advertisers have to think about, and they have to look at it. I think, the advertising business better than me, but I'm sure a lot of them are looking at likes, clicks, and shares and seeing what that is bringing in the door for them business-wise, and they're not looking at some of these other things that are really important. It's funny how you think of smaller communities, but even a city the size of Edmonton, we went for several weeks during the Oilers playoff run with no news about the Edmonton Elks in the sports section of the newspaper, because I guess the reporter was overcoming the Oilers. We're a pretty big community, but yet I felt there was something missing because they weren't covering the football team in Edmonton. And you can imagine what it's like in smaller communities where, how do you find out what's going on in the community? The new Walmart that's coming in, or the Costco, or whatever it might be, or, a robbery down the street. How do you find out when that newspaper isn't there anymore?
Grant, I'm going to come to you as the publisher of the Moosomin World Spectator. I'm hiring you as a media professional, someone who's got lots to offer me in terms of advice. And my question for you is, what things can I do to innovate? What can I do to change to make sure that moving forward, my product, my newspaper, remains trusted and valued by people in my community?
Well, you're probably a better expert in that area than I am, because weekly newspapers better than anybody in Western Canada. I would say you need to understand the importance of being local and continue to work on that angle as much as possible. Advertisers have to be told also the need to invest local. So I think that's important as well for the advertisers to understand that more than their advertising dollars and what they get out of it, there also are advantages to the community. So I would certainly work on that angle as well. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge because there's only so many dollars to go around. I hope that some of the content that media outlets are going to get from Google and whoever it might be is going to help. I hope there's going to be something to turn around the trend that we've seen over the last 20 years. But it's a challenge when you have, you're at the Moosomin paper you're talking about. I'm sure that you've got every hockey team and ball team coming to you saying, hey, can you sponsor us? And here's the newspaper, and you're going, well, wait a minute, I wish I had advertising dollars that I could sponsor everybody. I wish the same thing, we had dollars coming in the door. And so I just think they have to tell that story more about the importance of the dollar coming in the door and what the advertiser dollar means to them and the community.
Yeah, so if you were asking me my opinion on that very topic, so now I'm a supposed quote unquote expert.
You are.
I would suggest that these local news outlets need to continue to focus on what they do best. They need to continue to invest in the content that is exclusive to their platform. Let's face it, those hockey scores in Moosomin, they're not appearing anywhere but the local newspaper. The reporting on the council, the meeting last night, is happening nowhere but the local newspaper. And I could list off a dozen other types of stories that you're only going to be able to find in the local newspaper. And that is what makes that local newspaper so important to the community, because they want to know. They want to know what's going on. They want to know what happened in the hockey team. They wanted to know what council voted on last night. Right?
I do a lot of media training with municipalities, and some of them big, some are small, some are counties. And I've been told the story over and over again. Gee, we used to get 2 reporters every meeting, almost 2 reporters every meeting. Now, we might see a reporter once every 3 months if we got a big story going on. So here's our problem as a town council, a county council. How do we get the news out if the media's not showing up? And so they're seeing the problems occurring when they've got a new program, new service, somewhere where they're spending money, fixing up curb and gutter or whatever it might be, city streets, and people don't know about it because the media is not there to tell that story. So they're seeing a problem as well. It's not, I say to them, look, you have to tell your own story. If the media is not going to be there to tell your story, you're going to have to find ways to tell your story.
100%. As far as the advertising industry is concerned, the business is concerned, everything's about targeting, right? Messages need to be targeted to as granular of an audience as possible. The way a newspaper can actually deliver that granular audience is to keep the content local. And the fear I have, when you talk about, the cuts and the lack of resources to be able to invest in editorial content, all of those kind of things, the thing that scares me most about that is it's going to force a lot of these newspapers to rely on canned content or press releases or things that don't have that local connection to the market. And the minute that starts to happen, that's when the danger of losing readers, losing audience, losing listeners becomes very real. And at that point, it's cyclical, right? Once you've lost a reader, you've lost a subscriber, you've lost some circulation. Advertisers see that, and it looks like a slippery slope from there, right?
If you have to replace your local content because you don't have it anymore with national content, fluff pieces on self-help or celebrity news or whatever it is that you can get anywhere else, including the internet, much quicker, you're dead. What you need is to continue pumping out the local stuff, cover the local hockey teams. It has to be local, because you've got some news that nobody else can get. If you want to go back, when I was a kid growing up in the 70s in Edmonton, one of the exciting things was 4:30 in the afternoon when the Edmonton Journal landed on there, because there's all this news in there, things you've never heard of. And in those days, you could get by with national stuff because I hadn't heard it because we didn't have as much news. But now, the problem, as much as I dislike the 24-hour news networks and what they've done because they've got so much time to fill, the difference is in the old days, Harvey Kirk would come on at 11 o'clock at night and he would, tell you the news, and nobody disputed the fact that that wasn't true. Everybody believed Harvey because Harvey was not opinionated. These days, there's more opinions, and when you get to local news, there's a lot more stuff that isn't local anymore that they try to fill time, basically, and fill space.
We've talked a little bit, Grant, about what publishers can do, or broadcasters can do, or what advertisers can do. What can a community itself, a community in general, do to help support local journalism to ensure that their newspaper or their radio station is around in 5 years or 10 years? Like, what things can the community do?
I think they have to, first of all, tell the local newspaper, whatever it is, what they like, what they'd like to see more coverage of in a positive manner. I think they have to talk to, if they have some influence, they have to talk to some of the companies that they know. And, hey, Joe, I saw your ads on YouTube. They're kind of cool, but, are you spending money in the community? And I think this flag has to be waved because, as I've said, if we don't change the course of what's happening, those newspapers are going to be gone. And then what? It's going to be too late. Once they're gone, they're probably not coming back. Now, there's some fill-ins with local content in the bigger markets online. I see some good things going on across the country and different things, but they don't have the same mass appeal that a newspaper would, whether it is a local or a daily newspaper, a weekly or daily newspaper. So I just think we have to raise the flag and let people know that those advertising dollars have to be spent or that paper may not be there tomorrow.
That's interesting, Grant. One of the things that I do every time I open a newspaper to see if it's got engagement from the community, engagement from the readers, call it support, is I flip open to the editorial pages to see if there's letters to the editor. To me, there is no better gauge as to whether or not that newspaper has engaged its community to see if people are actually writing in to say, hey, I love that story, or hey, I hated that story, or hey, you had a mistake, a spelling mistake in that story. That kind of stuff to me really demonstrates to what level you are engaging with your audience and generally how they feel about you. So I think that's a good indicator as well.
It's interesting. I spoke at a conference in Niagara Falls last November, I think it was, and so I was talking to these water utilities about what they need to do to get their message. One of the things I said is letters to the editor. And I said, if they're looking for that content, you've got local content, you've got experts who write, why don't you make your thoughts known? I think it's a great source of companies to get their information out using letter. So you're looking at it from a different, thing that I am. Usually it's funny when I see letters to the editor, a lot of the time they complain about columnists and what a columnist said. And, this gets back to my point about opinion, where a columnist is telling you his or her opinion. And it's only their opinion, but boy, a lot of people get upset about it and they don't understand that there's a difference between that opinion, that columnist's opinion, and news content.
Even though it says opinion,
even though it says opinion, it doesnn't matter. It all get mixed. And the same thing we've seen happening on television, right? When with CNN's doing this and somebody's saying this, and I don't agree with that opinion. And of course, we've seen other changes in news where these days it seems if you don't like the facts, you say it's not true, or you don't believe it or something like that. And of course, the former president of the United States for 6 years has said that media is the enemy of the people. So it's understanding that there would be a mistrust of the media when, for the people who believe him, I guess he's got to be right because the media is the enemy of the people. In a local community setting, I think it's anything but.
Grant, it's obvious to me that local journalism is crucial, both in terms of being an information source to communities and a cornerstone of community trust. So, Grant, I want to thank you for taking the time, sharing some of your expertise with us today. It was fun. We could do this for 2 more hours, but unfortunately we're on a clock. So, Grant, thanks for coming out.
Thanks,
appreciate
Jeff.
it.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Take care.
Jeff and Grant, and thanks to all of you for spending some time with us here on The Local Edge. Again, I'm your host, Shauna Randolph. To stay in tune with all of us and to access all of our episodes, just be sure to subscribe to the Local Edge podcast. You can find it on any of the major platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever works for you. Also, don't forget to check out our website. It's adcanadamedia.ca. Thank you again for joining us here on Local Edge, and we will see you next time.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.